Happy New Year, everybody. The fantasy season has come to an end, and I'm hoping that you're holding up that fantasy football championship trophy as you listen to this. If you already have your trophy, just hold it. Just hold it in your arms while you listen to this because it's going to feel sweet. A lot of guys came through for us. A lot of guys didn't. But hoping that you were able to overcome some of that and become a fantasy football champion. All that work that you've done throughout the past few months, all culminating to this moment here. All right. So hoping if you're listening because you want to bask in your glory a little bit more. And if you ended up losing, well, I guess you just like pain. But we will talk about a few of the guys that didn't come through as well. Guys that did come through. We'll have a little bit of fantasy MVP talk. And all that, and a couple of things to look forward to in 2024. A couple of guys that might be falling off. Who should we expect to potentially bounce back? We have a lot to talk about in this episode. Okay, so if you had CeeDee Lamb, if you had Devontae Adams, Lamar Jackson with a legacy game against Miami. I mean, he's had a lot of legacy games, so maybe we don't call it a legacy game, but he came through at a time that was just like in the fantasy championship. Zach, I mean, I looked back for Lamar Jackson and, he wasn't available last year during the fantasy playoffs. He wasn't available 2 years ago in the fantasy playoffs. The last time that he was available was in 2020. And he actually averaged more fantasy points during that span than he did, in this span. So he had a big monster playoff run for you a couple of years ago as well. So this is not the first time that he's done it. Okay. So yeah, I mean, there's just so many timing performances are just timed perfectly right. Isaiah Pacheco, right? In week 17, coming off that concussion, we weren't sure whether he was going to play. He ended up coming through. DJ Moore, right? I did not expect this tough performance, tough matchup, snow? I should say. Yeah, dude, in the snow against Atlanta, tough matchup. He was making nice catches. That over the head catch on the sideline, dude. Like when he had to put his head all the way up to catch that in the snow while there's snowflakes falling into your eyeball. Like that was legit, dude.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Kyren Williams, perfectly. Justin Fields, man, making. Listen, man, he is like proving the doubters wrong right now, right? Like where he could be. They're like everyone's saying, like, what are the Bears going to do this offseason, right? And a lot of teams, you kind of look at what Justin Fields is doing right now. If the Bears choose to move on from him, which would be a crazy decision, well, we'll touch on that. And I don't think it's as crazy of a decision as some people might think. It more so has to do with, the contract situation and more so around like what can the team do with a rookie quarterback contract. Anyway,
we'll get to that.
But he's literally, in terms of his play, there are a lot of teams in the NFL that wish they had Justin Fields right now.
Yeah, 100%. And should we just hit on this now? Because we're kind of into it. But Justin Fields, look at the way he's been playing. This is the thing for me. And I was kind of on this earlier in the season, even before these past couple of games. I was like, Justin Fields, I don't know if he's gotten a real fair shake in Chicago. He's had some tough coordinator situations. Obviously, he hasn't had the best weapons, but as soon as you go get DJ Moore, I mean, the Bears, they're 7-9 right now. Obviously, that's not good enough. If you talk about holding a quarterback to a standard, you need to make the playoffs. They're not making the playoffs this year, but they're 7-9. They've won 4 of their last 5 games. Justin Fields is QB9 in fantasy points per game. 7 total touchdowns, just 3 picks. The interceptions, ball security was kind of a problem. He has the rushing upside. Did you see the Bears fans? They had a "We Want Fields" chant going at the stadium this weekend. Like that was, I don't know. That just made me happy. I don't know, because I felt bad for Justin Fields these past couple of years where he's just been kind of getting dumpstered, even though he's been doing like pretty much everything he can, for the team. He's giving them everything, and it's nice to see that. I've said this a few times before. Like I mentioned, we've been blabbing away about fantasy football, obviously, this whole season. But I think he's shown enough to give him another chance next year. It's probably going to be a huge draft for Chicago. I think that you could really, really set yourself up for the future. Set yourself up to have a really good shot down the line, kind of have a chance to come back. If it does end up being a mistake keeping Justin Fields, if you would trade back from the number 1 pick again, like how much draft capital are you looking at? You know what I'm saying? Like the amount of value they could set themselves up for would be huge. The eye test for me, we just talked about it on Sunday, was really, really good. The raindrop pass to DJ Moore, someone he's clearly developed a strong rapport with. I don't think they would be in the wrong to just stick with Justin Fields for another season. I think that would be ideal for fantasy football too, because the Bears, they're getting pieces. And suddenly, if they add another one or two pieces on offense, this could be a completely different team next season. Justin Fields, I know he was the most bet on player to be the MVP this season. That was way, way earlier in the season, like over the offseason. I remember that he was like the MVP favorite in terms of the most money on which player, whatever it was. I think that he deserves another shot in Chicago. I think that's going to happen. I think that's where they're going to go, because what we're seeing these past couple of weeks, I don't think they've become that disenchanted with him to the point where they're just ready to move on regardless of what he's done, because he looked pretty good.
Yeah, and I think at this point, I don't think there's any question about what he can accomplish and what his potential is, what his ceiling is, and what he could do on the field. I think I think more so this becomes a general manager type of question in terms of would you rather have another rookie come in like Caleb Williams, some highly touted rookie quarterback coming in and building a team with a rookie contract on the books, opposed to picking up Justin Fields, 5th-year option, or giving him a longer-term deal where you're going to have to pay him $40 million plus a year, right? Like, you're going to have to do that if you're going to extend him, right? So that's going to take up a huge cap number. And if you're going to do that and rebuild around him, are the Bears 1 year, 2 years away? I'm not sure that they are, right? And I think, if the Bears believe that this is a little bit of a longer term thing, like, I think we can get there in 2 years, it might make more sense to move on from Justin Fields, bring in a rookie, and by the time you hit that second, third year, you're still on that rookie contract, and you can build a much better team around that rookie quarterback. But there's a risk, right? There's a risk. What Justin Fields can do in the NFL, right? And we don't know what Caleb Williams can do in the NFL. So there are, that's why it's a tough decision. It's tough to be a GM and to be put in that position when you have a quarterback like Justin Fields and the number one pick overall. It's going to be interesting, man. It's going to be interesting to see what happens there. But at the end of the day, like, in terms of his talent, in terms of him deserving another shot, at this point, he's put that to rest, in my opinion.
Yeah. If it's not with Chicago, it's going to be somewhere else. And
for sure.
Know. So imagine would a dream scenario for you, and this is just me, dream scenario for me, I'm looking at this. Falcons lose. Arthur Smith gets canned. Justin Fields to Atlanta would be pretty freaking crazy, if you ask me. I mean,
Michael Vick 2.0?
Yeah, something like that. Not even that. Like, Justin Fields, like, the number of weapons down there, you just need someone that's going to take advantage of those weapons, because Justin Fields can go down there. I think the weapons they're better in Atlanta, and you get the wild card, the X factor here is Arthur Smith needs to be gone. If Arthur Smith stays,
Bijan and Justin Fields, running the ball, dude. Like, come on.
Backfield,
and then you add
Drake London.
And then you add Tyler Algier to that, and you Drake London and Kyle Pitts, and it's a good offense, man. It's a good offense.
And the offensive line's still good there too. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I would love
they have pieces.
Bring in, I'll be interested to see what kind of offensive coordinator that they bring in. But we're all Saints fans this week, by the way, guys. Okay, the Falcons are playing the Saints this week.
Yeah,
we need the Saints to win. The Falcons don't have a huge shot at making the playoffs, right? The most chances are that the Falcons end up missing the playoffs. But I just think that the Saints need to win this game, and they need to embarrass the Falcons. Like, I'm looking for Derek Carr to have a legacy game here. That's what we need. Yeah. Okay.
We need a Brandon Staley against the Raiders type embarrassment for Arthur.
We need we need Chris Olave to step back up, because he was a huge disappointment in week 17 for a lot of people. The matchup was really good on paper, and he ended up just crapping all over your fantasy team. Hopefully you were able to overcome that. We know that in our league, the guy who ended up going all the way to the championship, he was in my place on New Year's Eve. Okay. He was up by 80 points. Guess who he was going up against? Jordan Love, Jaden Reed. Not good. Okay.
That's tough.
He ended up losing. He was down. He was up 80 points. He was up 80 points.
Nah, 2
He had
players?
Jaden.
I don't.
No. Aaron Jones, Jaden Reed, Jordan Love, Justin Jefferson.
He was playing against all of them?
Yep,
Holy
he was playing
crap.
against all of them in our league. In our league, the one that we're in together.
I didn't.
He was down by
I
that much,
haven't,
and he ended up losing by 5 or 6 points or whatever it was.
that is
So
insane.
yeah, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude. I know.
And then Jaden Reed went out
It,
with the injury at
listen,
halftime. It's like
I had a
he almost
I had
caught
a
it
New
there.
Year's party at my place. He was at my place, and not good timing, right? Because it's like you're hoping to win. He ended up losing, around like whatever time it was.
Yeah.
Hasn't struck midnight yet. We're having a good
11:30.
time, but like the amount of fun that you can have when you on the same night that you lose your fantasy championship, that ceiling drops a little bit. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
It does.
Yeah, no.
So.
If you pop the champagne with a victory, in your fantasy championship, that's
Oh my
much
God,
better.
yes. Are
Then
you
now
kidding me?
you pop the champagne, you just pop the cork, and it's just like,
Yeah.
well, let's pour the drinks.
Yeah. Exactly.
You're not interested in it at all. Oh my God, no, I couldn't imagine.
Dude, it
That
was
sounds
bad, man.
terrible,
It was bad.
especially going in
But
with an
Jordan,
80-point lead. Like,
dude,
man,
it was so bad, man. Jordan Love and Jaden Reed, they connected a couple times. They had a couple of huge performances. And like I said, you either had a really good New Year's Eve or a really bad one, depending on what side of that you were on.
oh yeah,
But Brees Hall, James Conner might be the most underrated league-winning running back of them all. Okay,
yeah.
he got it
Oh my
done.
God.
Okay, only Christian McCaffrey averaged more fantasy points than him since week 13, and then you look what he had to go through. Look at the schedule. He had 2 big games in the fantasy playoffs against the 49ers and the Eagles. Okay, so he got it done.
Yeah, against the 49ers and Eagles. The Eagles were a tough run defense. And granted, their
Yeah,
defense has been playing worse, these past few weeks since the bye, but there was a tough run defense. He went 26 for 128 and a touchdown against them. Like that's
beast.
you don't have any other running back doing that. And the Cardinals had nothing to play for, which makes it even more hilarious. Because it's like, what is James Conner doing with 26 fantasy points against the Eagles? And it's pretty much all on the ground. He had that one receiving touchdown. It was a one-hander, right? I don't know.
Yeah,
It was a really nice catch. I mean, he was just giving them the business. It
straight up, man.
completely. No one was expecting that. I definitely wasn't expecting that. I was looking at like, okay, maybe we'll see like a 60-yard performance. He scores a touchdown. It'd be a mid RB2. No, he was the RB4 on the week.
I just want to take this moment to let you guys know who had a really good New Year's Eve. And that was our very own Zach Rizzuto. Zach. Very nice.
That's what I'm talking
2
about.
fantasy
Thank you.
titles to your name this
Yep.
year. You were pretty excited on January 1st. You
Heck
woke
yeah.
up as a 2-time. You won 2 of your leagues this year.
Yes.
So
2 out of
which
4.
players, like if you had to tell me like the players that came through for you that are most I guess most memorable, maybe this year, but also like just like to help you win it. Who are those guys?
Yeah. Okay, so as the resident Cowboys fan, I think you can guess who I had on both of my teams. That would be CeeDee Lamb. And never been a better time to pick CeeDee Lamb. I took CeeDee Lamb last year thinking this was the breakout year. You know what I'm saying? And he came through. It was good, but it wasn't what we're seeing this year. In our one league together, not the home league, the upper hand league, my whole team took off for New Year's besides CeeDee Lamb. And Lamar did his thing too. We mentioned Lamar earlier. He had 36 points. That was really nice, the legacy game. So that was just under 80 points combined right there between the two of them. But the X factor in my lineup in that championship game was Jerome Ford. And I don't know if anybody else had Jerome Ford in their lineup, but he had 26 PPR points. That didn't seem significant until late on New Year's Eve. My margin of victory in that league was 3 points. So all I have to say is thank you, Joe Flacco. Your Linsanity run won me my fantasy football league. It was just like awesome. And then in my other league, I had the Dak Prescott to CeeDee Lamb stack. So you can imagine that worked out pretty well for me. And I also, purely by virtue of you, Faraz, I had Puka Nacua and Tank Dell in that league too. And it's Dynasty. So they were both on my taxi squad. They both got called up pretty much immediately, to start the season. I lost Tank Dell, unfortunately. Obviously he went on the IR, but Puka Nacua was there for me. And he actually saved me in that league with that 80-yard catch and run. I wanted that to be a touchdown so bad because, again, in that league too, the rest of my fantasy team just took off for New Year's Eve. Like Zeke was my next highest scorer behind Dak, CD, and Puka. It was Zeke. And he had that one garbage touchdown at the end. He had like 11 points. Like, it was very stressful New Year's Eve, but they both worked out. And I was also playing against Travis Kelce in the other league, and he shit the bed, needless to say. And we'll talk about him, later on, because suddenly Travis Kelce, there's no positional advantage anymore. Now he's just one of the guys. You know what I'm saying? He's one of those guys that's in that. There's no separation anymore.
Yeah, man. I think it's safe to say that we're seeing the downfall of Travis Kelce right now. He couldn't crack 10 fantasy points in the fantasy playoffs. This was going to happen at some point. It was just a matter of time.
Yeah.
He's a
Right.
legend at the position. He's a fantasy football legend, but all good things must come to an end. He's going to be 35 years old in October next year. Okay, so
sounds old.
It's old.
It really does.
He's younger than me though. But I
that is funny. Like, you ever talk about fantasy football players or just football players in general, and they say like this guy's 33, 34 years old. You're like, what an old piece of shit. You know what I'm saying?
It's
like,
and we're gonna get to Austin Ekeler we're gonna get to Austin Ekeler
Yeah.
a little bit. He's not even 30 yet, and we're gonna call him old in a second. But
That's crazy. Yeah.
Kelce has played in every game this year except in week 1, and on a points per game basis, he actually was the tight end 1 alongside TJ Hawkinson, but he was a tight end 8 since his week 10 bye. And the thing that made him special for fantasy over the last several years was the positional advantage he brought. And that's what we didn't have this year, right? Which made him a first round bust. He had a full 6-point cushion ahead of the next best tight end in fantasy points per game last year. He scored almost 100 more fantasy points than the next best tight end, TJ Hawkinson, last year. But this throne is likely to be taken from him in 2024, right? We will not have a first round tight end. We likely won't have a second round tight end. But I think some tight ends, will start coming off the board potentially in the 3rd and 4th rounds. TJ Hawkinson, Mark Andrews, Sam Laporta. I think Trey McBride, might end up being like that mid-round tight end that I aim for. I'm guessing he's going to be around those mid-rounds. If I had to guess, and he might be the guy that I'm guessing will be like the best value of the bunch, right? But yeah, man, thank you, Travis Kelce, for all the dominant years. But it looks like that torch is going to be passed this year.
Who is the torch going to be passed to? Like,
I don't know.
I don't think there's any one player that's going to be passed to. Like, you talk about, okay, if Travis Kelce was on the throne, who's going to take it? I think it's going to be like a communal throne. Like, I don't think there's going to be any, head and shoulders far and away tight end 1 over the rest. I think it's now just going to go back to being, just pretty much crapshoot, and maybe not so much a crapshoot now that they're all going to be in that range where it's like, okay, if you're averaging 16 points per game as a tight end, you're top 2 or 3. There's going to be a bunch of tight ends in that range, but I don't think we're going to have another Travis Kelce here unless Sam Laporta really, blows up next season. But you have Amon-Ra St. Brown in that offense, Jahmyr Gibbs in that offense still. I don't think that's going to lend itself to him being, the overall clear tight end 1. And it's funny, as I'm saying that, he did end up being the tight end 1 in total points per game. Not points per game, total points scored, right? He was the overall tight end 1.
Oh, and points per game as well. Points per game, he was the tight end 1. He was tied with TJ Hawkinson. Yeah.
Okay. So co-tight end 1. Okay. So there you go. So that there you go. That demonstrates my point. He's not going to be far away. He's just going to be in that group. I think those top guys, like you mentioned, are going to be the guys. Next up on the fall off list, like, could it be Mark Andrews? I don't think TJ Hawkinson, he's definitely not going to be coming off the board in the 3rd or 4th round, I don't think, because of that injury. That's one thing to keep in mind. Like,
that's true.
We forget.
That's very true.
He has that ACL, MCL. He could be out for the first 6-7 weeks. And especially if they have like a middle of the season bye, they have a bye in like week 9 next year, they might just say, shut him down until then. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's going to thin things out even more at the top. I think you're definitely not going to have anyone in the 1st or 2nd round at tight end at this point. And where's Travis Kelce going to go? Like, it's going to be weird not having him being picked inside the top 15, right? That's going to be really weird.
It is. It's going to be later for sure. It might be the 4th round. I can see that. He's going to be 35, man. And then Mark Andrews, you mentioned him. He's 28 right now. He's turning 29 in September. I think that age is perfectly fine for a tight end. Like, he has years left, right?
Yeah.
Like, we usually don't see drop off from elite tight ends until 33, 34, that age. And when you're elite, it might be a little bit longer, like we saw with Travis Kelce. So yeah,
Rob Gronkowski,
so yeah, we still have a few more years with him. But yeah, I think the best bets for like the next guys are like Sam Laporta is probably, the best bet, I would say, at the most upside, right? I think Mark Andrews is there. You mentioned, we mentioned TJ Hawkinson, but you're absolutely right about the ACL. I think and then Trey McBride's going to be kind of hanging around that 5th, 6th round potentially. Like, and that would be great. That intrigues me. a ton, to be honest.
So the new agenda
Yeah,
that we need set for the podcast over the offseason is to just screw over Trey McBride's draft capital and draft, ADP, just lower it by talking
100%.
bad on him all offseason. That's the new agenda. It's a new plan.
I love that. And it's going to be a bad offense, but most likely, and or like the narrative is going to be that it's a bad offense, and that didn't really matter for him this year, to be honest.
Yeah.
Okay. So back to week 17, Raheem Mostert, he was, that he was a last minute inactive, right? Definitely sent a lot of people into panic mode. If you listen to this podcast, you knew that it was a possibility. But if you had Devon Achane, he was a must start, and he delivered. He went for almost 140 total yards and a touchdown. I'm very interested to see what this Dolphins depth chart is going to look like next year, right? It's very possible we don't see Raheem Mostert there. It's very possible we don't see Jeff Wilson there. Achane very well could be, and most likely will be, their RB1 on the depth chart. I can't imagine that he doesn't have a complement to run alongside him, right? I don't think they're going to go into the season with him as like the guy who they're planning on giving 300 touches to. So I think it'll be some sort of committee. But I think even with him as a 1A to a 1B, more of a Thunder guy who they bring in, I think Achane, very, very well could be in the RB1 conversation next year. I mean, he was an RB1 this year on a points per game basis. So it could definitely happen. I just want them to – I actually want them to have a compliment to him, to be honest with you, because I want him to hold up for the entirety of the 2024 season.
Exactly. And like at this point in his career, he's very new. He's young, and he's already kind of sketchy with his injury history. This season he's missed a couple games for different things. There's no way that they don't get some kind of compliment, I don't think, for him in the backfield. And you mentioned Thunder to his Lightning is exactly what you're looking for. They go get an early down running back. That's all you need. Like, you don't need to go get somebody to do everything because Devon Achane, he can already do that. Just get somebody that's going to do the tough running between the tackles, let Achane take it on the outside, that kind of thing. That's what I'm looking for. I think you're looking for that too. Like, don't get me wrong, I love him as a talent. I'd be ecstatic if he got 18 or 20 touches a game next year, but he doesn't need that. And that's only going to end up wearing him down faster, like you mentioned. It doesn't seem like they're going to do that given the way that Mike McDaniel has been running the offense since he's been there. But Mostert being out, obviously this week hurt a lot of fantasy managers in their championship round. That just sucked, especially if you didn't have Devon Achane. But if you had a guy like Khalil Herbert or Justice Hill, they both had 20 PPR points on the day, just out of nowhere pretty much. You might have been able to get away with him being out. It was a really odd week. Just lots of unfamiliar names among the top scorers, like Bo Melton. He had 20 points. Who is Bo Melton? Like, you'd see him running around the field. It's like, there's always a new Packers wide receiver. Yeah.
These Packers like the Packers are all about the Senior Bowl, dude. Like, they're all about it. Okay, are you ready? Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Bo Melton, Dontavian Wicks, Jaden Reed.
That's crazy.
Did I mention Jaden Reed? All 5 of those guys, Senior Bowl. Luke Musgrave, Senior Bowl. Like,
that's their whole offense.
Crazy. Their whole offense is a Senior Bowl, dude. It's so crazy.
Yeah, every time Jordan Love throws the ball, it's like, oh wait, who is this receiver? It's like there's a new receiver just out of nowhere. It's like Bo Melton. I never heard of this guy until 2 weeks ago. Like, I think
I would only know him
flash
because
or something like that.
I'm in New Jersey. If I'm not mistaken, Bo Melton went to Rutgers. Hold on, let me confirm.
Oh,
that.
Really?
Yeah, he was at Rutgers. And I know him from the Senior Bowl. That's kind of that's the only reason why I know him, though. You mentioned you mentioned Khalil Herbert, right? Another underrated last minute surprise was Deontay Foreman getting the healthy scratch, right? Like, we didn't expect that coming. Khalil Herbert ended up getting all the work against Atlanta. Roshan was definitely involved as well, but Herbert was the primary guy. Tough matchup against Atlanta, but he ended up coming through with the big game. If I'm not mistaken, if he scored a rushing touchdown, I think that might have been the first rushing touchdown that Atlanta has given up all year long, if I'm not mistaken. Let me double check that.
Really?
I think so. I think Atlanta hasn't given up. I can double check that real quick. So
that would
Atlanta has allowed 3 touchdowns to running backs this year on the ground, and that was the last, which is last in the NFL, or well, first in the NFL if you're on the side of, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, it's crazy.
Mm-hmm. That's still fantastic as a defense. Holy crap!
Yeah, I know. And I'm looking at it now. And those rushing touchdowns have come very recently. Khalil Herbert in week 17 and Jonathan Taylor in week 16, right? So, Yeah, pretty impressive. But yeah, if you had Khalil Herbert, you had to pick him up last minute. It ended up working out. I always thought Herbert was a good player, right? Especially after what he did last couple of seasons. But there was just no consistency in this backfield. Like, it was just so random. Whenever they had a workhorse though, like whether it was Herbert or Foreman, like it actually came through. There was volume to be had, and they ended up performing when they give them the workload. This is why I was high on this backfield coming in, because there's a bunch of talented guys here, but like there's no continuity, right? So it was tough to really figure that out. But again, going into the offseason, it's like you still want to attack these ambiguous backfields, right? That's something that we talked about a lot last offseason.
Yeah.
So
I was just about to say it. I was like, what's the word? Ambiguous.
Yeah. I mean, listen, it worked out with Kyren Williams, right? It worked out with Devon Achane, right? It worked out. It could have worked out with the Bears backfield. It didn't, but it could have. And there were a couple other ones that yeah.
Like, I don't think that they're going to hold on to Deontay Foreman at this point. Like, I don't think he's going to be with the team. That was a 1-year contract. They signed him just as some depth, but I think they know what they have now. Khalil Herbert's fine, and Rashawn Johnson, he has the receiving chops, which is fine. We talked about him also potentially having the ability to take over the backfield, if he would get that run. He didn't really get that because he was hurt here or there. All of these guys got hurt or missed time. Foreman, Johnson, and Herbert, they all missed time, so that makes it really difficult to have continuity at that point, because then at that point you're riding the hot hand. And how many times do we say that? You're riding the hot hand starting any Bears running back. That's just how it worked. Like it was Deontay Foreman for a little bit, then Khalil Herbert came in towards the end of the year, and Rashawn Johnson would sprinkle in a game or two where he caught 7 passes. It's just a real pain in the butt to try and navigate it. But there's definitely points to be had. Like, the offense is good enough. Obviously, we're not saying that you can't target anybody, but you mentioned, it looks like it's going to be, if you had to guess who their starter is for next season, who do you think it would be? Like, it has to be Herbert. They're not going to go draft somebody, right?
Yeah. I don't think so. I think they'd be good enough to go Herbert and Roshan. At this point, Roshan's such a good pass blocker too. Like, I don't see the need. I mean, they'll probably bring in a third running back for depth, but like it would probably be a late round pick or someone off the street.
Yeah. Right. Darrell Henderson.
But speaking of missing time, super disappointing if you had Josh Jacobs. Couldn't use him in the fantasy playoffs. Same thing with Keenan Allen. But look at Zamir White stepping in, man. He understood the assignment. Right, he got it done. RB12, RB16, RB16. Right, like very, very solid. Right, he came through, got it done, got the volume, got the touchdowns. He did his thing, man. Like, Antonio Pierce doing a good job. It's very possible he's one of the few interim head coaches that could actually end up being a head coach the following season.
Yeah, I think he definitely should be. And I guess comparatively, if you look, anybody compared to Josh McDaniels, like, is going to be a step up at that point, given what they had done, what had happened over the past couple of years with Josh McDaniels, a year and a half, whatever it was. It was pretty easy. You just had to play competent football and you'd be all right. But you have a guy that the players rally around, and it seems like they have a lot more going for them than they did with Josh McDaniels, which is funny because Josh McDaniels is supposed to be this offensive coach. We've seen the Josh McDaniels experiments not work before. So I guess you can't say you were surprised that it didn't work out in Las Vegas, especially with the quarterback situation. But with the running backs, Josh Jacobs is out. That sucks. But at least they gave you a 1-for-1 handcuff replacement. It's not like they tried to go and platoon the running back situation. Sure. I think, what's his name? Was it Abdullah? Who was it in the back?
Abdullah. Yep.
Yeah. They sprinkled him in. They didn't make him a 50-50 part of this backfield. It was Zamir White for the most part, most of the way. That made it really easy on us for fantasy land. We didn't have to worry about, is Amir Abdullah going to vulture a touchdown here or there? Amir Abdullah did score a touchdown against the Chargers, but who didn't score against the Chargers? This is how it worked in that game. But yeah, Zamir White, he looks good. So he's going to be, like, are you looking at him as one of the best handcuffs next season? Like, I mean, let's see. Josh Jacobs, what did he sign? Was it a 1-year deal?
I don't think Josh Jacobs is going to be there next year, man. I don't.
That's what I mean. So, like, do you think Zamir White showed enough where he's going to be, he can be trusted? You don't think so? No.
No.
You think they're going to go draft somebody or like go find somebody?
I'll be selling so hard in Dynasty if I can. If anybody thinks that I don't think he's going to be the guy, man. I think they're going to draft somebody or bring somebody in as a free agent.
Tony Pollard, if you are a Las Vegas Raider.
No, man, I don't even think so. Like, I think they're gonna, especially if Antonio Pierce is the head coach, they're gonna bring somebody who's like a grinder, right? Like they're gonna bring in somebody who can like definitely handle like early downs, right? Like that's something that is just like the identity of what Antonio Pierce wants it to be, right? He wanted it to be for Josh
Yeah.
Jacobs, but I don't see Jacobs coming back. I think they're going to get a younger running back to handle that workload.
Well, they're definitely not paying Jacobs, unless he takes a massive pay cut, which isn't going to
yeah,
happen.
there's a lot of running backs who are going to be coming on the market this year. It's going to be interesting to see what that market turns into, because I don't think there's going to be that much money for these running backs this year. If we thought last year was
No.
bad, I think this is going to be
Yeah,
even worse this year.
exactly. Yep.
It's crazy how Lamar stepped it up when it mattered most, man. Overall QB1 in week 14 to help you secure a fantasy playoff spot. Overall QB11 in week 15 to the QB6 in week 16 to the clear QB1, the overall QB1 in week 17, right? With a ridiculous performance. Okay. Easily the QB1 over that span. MVP favorite at this point. Real life football. Before that game, he was a QB10 in fantasy. Okay. It was all about Josh Allen, all about Jalen Hurts, Dak Prescott, CJ Stroud. It's amazing how week to week this game is, right? But he ended up
Yeah.
coming through when it mattered most. Zay Flowers with 2 big games back to back. In the last 5 games of the season, he finished outside the top 13 wide receivers just once. All right. So he had a huge lull in the middle of the year. Zay Flowers did. Definitely showed some great signs early on, target share, all that. But now we're going to be talking about him potentially taking a big step forward next year. Now that he's emerging as this like legit wide receiver later in the season.
Right. Like, where would you project him to be, like, in terms of this is a very loose, and I didn't put this on the notes or anything. This is just a question that popped in my head as you're saying
Yeah.
this. Like, where would you project him to be in terms of your rankings? Are you putting him as a wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3,
Probably
like
wide
high
receiver
end, low
2.
end?
I can see him being a wide receiver 24, assuming they don't add anybody else in, anybody else of significance to that wide
Yeah.
receiver room. Yeah. I would put
That's
him
my
in the
fear.
top 24. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that he's emerging, but I'm just looking at the trajectory the Ravens are on. Obviously, they're among the favorites to win the Super Bowl. Their draft pick is probably going to be later as opposed to sooner, in the first round. I would be shocked to see them turn around and draft another receiver in the first round if they're sitting anywhere between 29 and 32. Like, would it be a bit overkill? Sure. They did just draft Zay Flowers in the first round last year. Did they draft another receiver in the first round the year before that? You bet. That was Rashad Bateman. But he struggled with injuries. They're going to have a decision to make on his 5th-year option. He was a first-round pick. He's had injuries through most of his career so far. If you could add some size on the outside with a guy like, I don't know, Keon Coleman out of Florida State, like, I think the Ravens would consider adding that type of talent to Lamar's arsenal after seeing what just giving him weapons on offense did for his game. Like, you have Rashad Bateman. He's been dealing with injuries. You don't have to pick up his 5th-year option. Odell Beckham's not going to be there. They don't have a need for a guy like Odell Beckham making $50 million a year guaranteed. He signed 1-year contract, $50 million. He's not going to be around next year. I think that you look at what the Ravens can do, they could potentially upgrade in the draft. Do they have any other holes to fill at this point? Like, if they want to go luxury here and really just give Lamar Jackson the pieces around him, especially after what's going to be probably an MVP season, like you mentioned, I don't think they would, not think about that. I think they definitely consider that and be like, okay, well, now we need to weigh our options. If they do that, they add a guy on the outside, Mark Andrews would be coming back. That would kind of hurt Zay Flowers, and it would suck. I love
Yeah.
Zay Flowers,
It
super
would
talented,
really
but
depend on who that wide receiver is that they add for sure, because we have to
yeah.
evaluate that talent to see, if they're going to deserve targets over Zay. But Zay's been a target earner this entire year, right? And we've seen it, and we've been very intrigued by that. And that's one of the biggest sticky points when it comes to year over year steadiness, right? With these wide receivers
Right.
and
The
what
sticky
sticks.
stats. Yep.
That's one of them, target share. So, I feel like he's going to be fine. But this wide receiver class is very, very deep, and it's very, very good. So
Yeah.
you could potentially draft somebody in the second round this year who would have been going in the first round in 2023. Okay,
Yeah.
so just keep that in mind.
If they had
Speaking
a guy
of,
like a Quentin Johnston, then you won't have anything to worry about with Zay Flowers.
right, and if Quentin Johnson was coming out this year, I don't even
3rd
know if
round,
he's
4th round.
yeah, like it may be, man. At best second
I don't
round.
A
At
lot
best
of
second
people were high on Quentin Johnson coming out, and
round. Of
I
course,
know PFF was, and they're usually on it. You know what I'm saying? But that was just interesting. It's a tough situation anyway. But like you're running behind Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, but then both of them missed time and all that, and he still isn't doing anything. It's really weird how that's shaken out. Like, I blame
yeah.
Kellen Moore. obviously, but
I blame Quentin
I just
Johnston.
don't know what's going on there.
I blame Quentin Johnston. Okay, best waiver wire pickup, late round draft pick has to be between Puka Nacua and Kyren Williams,
Yeah,
and I think
2
I have
a.m.
to give the edge to him, to Williams, right? But I think there's a lesson here. A lot of people like to save that fab, save that number one waiver wire priority. I think the best pickups are at the beginning of the season, right? After week 1, week 2, week 3. When you see a big performance early, if it matches the utilization, if there's a chance that target share can continue, if you think that there's a big chance that that rushing share and that volume can continue, spend your fab. Put those chips in, right? Like I
Yep.
know a lot of people in this community drafted Puka, but he was a serious priority after week 1, after he had a solid performance. Same thing with Kyren Williams. I've seen some advice around this saying don't overreact to 1 week, don't overreact to week 1. Like I agree with that to some extent, but at the same time, like we have to notice when things add up, because when you hit, especially when you hit early in the year like that, they literally helps you win all year long to get to the playoffs and to win the championship.
Yeah. Oh, there's no question. And it's easy to say, okay, how many times we see it where there's a big performance in week 1 and a player has a big, they have their big game and then suddenly they just fall off, but you just spend up all your fab. Like these philosophies, they look good pretty much under a microscope. If you zoom out and look at the grand scheme of things and you see all of them, it's like the totality. It's like you can't follow either of these to a T. You just have to use what you know, like you mentioned, utilization, line that up, that kind of thing, and just make your best guess at that point. I agree 100% with spending your fab, especially early. You know, I'd be lying if I said I made good use of my fab dollars this year in any of our leagues. I was a total cheapskate with mine. I like to poach players after the waivers clear. I pretty much take whatever scraps are left. That served me well, relatively well, in a few of my leagues. But I missed out in those leagues on guys like Puka Nacua. This is how it goes sometimes. So you mentioned that philosophy. That's what's going to land you Kyren Williams, Puka Nacua, Tank Dell, Devon Achane in some cases, even a guy like Rashee Rice. Once you add those players, it's important to remember, like, and I think you would agree with this, even if you've seen a good game or two and then suddenly things shift one way or the other, don't just panic and drop them. Like, you have to remember why you added them. Like, look at Rashee Rice. Took him pretty much 3/4 of the year to get going. Now that he is, we could be talking about him as a top 50 fantasy pick next year. As for Kyren Williams versus Puka Nacua, I think that Williams as a running back has more value. That makes him probably the waiver wire pickup of the year, whatever you want to call him. But he went on IR. He missed some games for his managers. Puka didn't, and he was pretty consistent pretty much the whole season. He had a couple games here or there in the middle where it was like, oh, Cooper Kupp came back. Things were in flux. I think I would lean Puka as the waiver wire pickup, late round pick of the year, whatever you want to call it, because he was 4th overall in receiving yards behind only Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, and A.J. Brown. And that's an offense with Cooper Kupp. So you can nitpick. There's no wrong answer with either of these two guys, but I'm going with Puka here just because his availability and consistent production, I think, makes him just a little bit more valuable. But there is something to be said when you have a running back like Kyren Williams, who is just scoring, week in and week out when he plays. At running back, there are a lot fewer running backs than there are receivers. So I think if you want to play value-based, I think it would be Kyren Williams. But if you want to play just overall, who had the better season, I'm going with Puka.
And I think both these guys are also in line to be a fantasy MVP, however you define that, right? And I think both of those guys are on that list. Those are nominees there. CeeDee Lamb, right? Brock Purdy,
he's my pick,
right? Tyreek Hill, Raheem Mostert, Rashad White, if you're looking at price, Mike Evans, if you're looking at price, Christian McCaffrey, right? Lamar Jackson, really, a little iffy throughout the year, but then fantasy playoffs came through. He came through, and then Amon-Ra, right? If you had to take some guys off of that list, because, I'm actually going to be putting a poll up on our Instagram story, and I want the audience and the community to decide who the fantasy MVP is, right?
Yeah.
Who are you taking off of that list? Like, if you had to guess, is DJ Moore somebody? Obviously the price was good. In terms of like the value that you got for him, but like, is he a fantasy MVP?
Nah, for me,
No, right?
and I don't know how you feel about this. I would say no, but there's a difference between fantasy MVP and value of the
best
season,
value,
like that kind of thing.
Sure.
There's a best value player. I think there's a difference there. So if you talk about, like we just mentioned, Kyren Williams, DJ Moore is on there for best value of the season. Obviously he had a couple quiet games, but overall he was very good. So he has that ability to be the value player. But I think MVP implies you need consistent performance, especially when it matters. And it kind of falls along the same lines as the NFL MVP, where you need to make the plays and you need to have the performances that you need to have in the big spots. You look at guys in the playoffs that were able to get it done for you. I'm looking at what CeeDee Lamb did. He was obviously in the first 5 or 6 weeks super quiet, didn't do a whole lot. But after the bye, he didn't have a game under 16 points. He was far and away the best receiver, in the NFL in terms of fantasy points, that kind of thing. I think he was, since week 8, he was a couple points per game over the next guy, second place. He was just ridiculous. And he in the fantasy playoffs, he got better in each of the games. So he had 18 points in week 15, 25 points in week 16, and then 40 points in week 17. Like, that's exactly the performance that you're looking for. And he pretty much saved your season in the middle of it, probably propelled you into the playoffs, and then continued your winning streak in the playoffs. That kind of like timing, and obviously you can't like correlate it and say that, oh yeah, CeeDee Lamb knew he was playing in the fantasy playoffs, that's why he played this well. But that kind of timing, like, that is fantasy MVP worthy, because he pretty much won you your season. Like, he did it for me in 2 leagues, and I'm sure other people had that same experience. So I would go with CeeDee Lamb. I don't think DJ Moore is on that list. I'm on Ra. He was good, but he didn't have that earth shattering type of production those weeks where he would just blow the top off of the place. He was very good, very consistent. I think I would put him in the bucket as like most reliable, most dependable. Like, there's so many superlatives we could throw out. But if you want to talk about MVP, I think my pick would be CeeDee Lamb and Tyreek Hill. And
who would your top 5 be? CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Christian McCaffrey.
Yep, 100%.
Is Raheem Mostert up there?
I think he can be. When he scored 20-some touchdowns in 20 touchdowns, I think he can be. He didn't ever have like a performance where it's like, oh, well, now we're screwed. And he was doing that with Devon Achane in the backfield. So I put him there. But off the top of my head, like, I don't know who the
Kyren Williams. Is Kyren Williams there, or did he miss too many games?
If he didn't miss 4 games, if he didn't miss those games, I think I would put him in there. But he can't. I think he has potential to be MVP next season if the usage continues. You know what I mean? He can be the MVP, definitely, but I don't think it's this season, if that makes sense. Because we saw what he did. He was 100% elite when he was on the field. But if you're not on the field, it's hard to give you the MVP, because you did, even if it was out of control, leave your team hanging. That's the way I look at it.
More fantasy points than Raheem Mostert on a points per game basis, right below Christian
points
McCaffrey.
Per game. Yeah.
24.5 fantasy points per game for Christian McCaffrey and 21.3 for Kyren Williams. He was the RB2 on the year.
Yeah.
So I think he's in the conversation. So I think those are the 5. Any of these other guys should be in the conversation. Brock Purdy. Let's see.
Josh Allen.
Josh
Allen. He's a quarterback. It's tough for quarterbacks because they generally score more points than any other player, in any other position. The top guys at quarterback are always going to pretty much outscore, unless you have a tremendous season. They're always going to outscore the running backs and the tight ends and the wide receivers, just because they get the ball pretty much on every single play, regardless. So,
all right, I think we have a top 5 here, and we're going to figure out who that guy is. I'm guessing it's going to be CeeDee Lamb, but we'll see. All right,
that would be my guess.
You might have been on the short end of the stick during the playoffs. Week 17, there are a few guys who didn't help you. Tony Pollard being like the number 1 bust of the season, I would say. Like, just the timing on his bad games, his draft capital, the hype. A lot of it provided by me before the season. By the way, he's not the same guy. Okay, his role, his production, in the Cowboys offense this year was extremely replaceable, right? But not cracking 8 PPR fantasy points in any game during the playoffs is an all-time abomination.
Just gross, especially after 4 straight games of getting it done. He had 16 points or more in the 4 games before that. Each of the 4 games before that, a couple of those games were on the road. It's like, what the heck happened? I mean, we've seen this from Tony Pollard this season. He started, he goes hot, he was warm, and he was cold, then he was warm again, he was cold, that kind of thing. He looked like he was going to have that receiving role. He got a little bit of receiving role starting in week 11, and after that, it just kind of fizzled out. We put so much hype into him, and the stars were aligning. You talk about it with the Cowboys offense. We heard chatter over the offseason. Dallas is going to be more run first, that kind of thing. Here they turn around and CeeDee Lamb's having the best season by a receiver in Cowboys history. Like, that obviously didn't play out. We thought, we're just going to dismiss this calf injury, this leg injury that he had. and he ends up not looking 100%, and he still doesn't look 100%. He still doesn't have that burst that he had last season. The efficiencies come way down, and not only has the efficiency come way down, but the utilizations come all the way down. He's not getting that type of workload that Zeke was getting, even when he was there last year. So all of that comes into play, and it was just, like you mentioned, the way that you hyped him up, the way that I hyped him up, the way that we all hyped him up, just made him the biggest letdown of the season. I think there's no question he was the letdown of the season. Like, is there anybody else even in that realm where it's like he was where they would challenge him for that title? I don't think there is.
I think that there were a few, but he is definitely the most notable. He was definitely the most notable. There were definitely some first round busts, but he takes the cake for like the biggest bust in the first 2 rounds, I would say.
But he had zero upside. Like, that was the issue. Like, you felt like he was one of those guys that was going to have that ceiling every single week.
Oh yeah.
And he didn't. Like, there was no ceiling game here. He topped out at 22 fantasy points.
And in the games that Zeke missed last year, he just went off. And it's just like
he fooled us so hard. I don't know how it happened. But like I said, like, we were pounding the table on his efficiency. It's like number 1 yards after contact per attempt, like that kind of thing. Like, all these stats that just made so much sense. And then it's just like it all came crashing down. Very disappointing. And talk about a contrast. You have the fantasy MVP and the bust of the year on the same offense. Like, that's pretty crazy.
James Cook was dominating coming into the playoffs, right? The role was looking really good. And even in week 15, big game. But then week 16 and week 17, only 5 PPR fantasy points, dude. Absolutely brutal. So he got you into the dance. He likely got you past the first round, and then nothing. Big hole in your lineup these last couple weeks.
And that's because his receiving role was just revoked. It's just gone. We were talking about that, and we can pound the table. We can say this as many times as we have. We've said this so many times. He was getting targeted at such a high rate, even though he wasn't running a whole lot of routes. It's like, can we get that back, please? Like, he got more touches on the ground, 25, 20, and 16 rush attempts in each of the past 3 games, the playoff games. But when you're only running for 70 yards and not catching any passes, no touchdowns, that's empty calories. And we had that discussion a couple of days ago on the podcast. We said you could rush for 120 yards, 130 yards, and you should get some extra points for it, really, because like that's an impressive performance, but you don't, unless you have special statistics, point calculations in your league. It was just really disappointing. Like, he didn't look bad against the Chargers, but 70 yards is going to do it. And then 16 for 48, not efficient at all. Just completely lost the role that he had before. I didn't see that coming. It was really just, it sucks. Like, he like you mentioned, 36 to go from 36 points to 5 and 5. It's just terrible.
And then his teammate. There are going to be a lot of questions around Stefon Diggs going into next year. Couldn't crack 9 fantasy points in any of the 3 fantasy playoff games. He finished outside the top 36 in 6 of his last 7 games of the fantasy season. Absolutely brutal. And you were likely starting him every week, which was the worst part about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you couldn't. It was so hard to bench him, right? Diggs is 30 years old now, and I don't think I'm ready to call it quits on Stefon Diggs. Okay,
I'm not either.
He is likely going to be in the value territory for me next year. He definitely left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths in the second half of the year. I don't necessarily think he lost a step. The usage has been there too. From week 10 on, he was getting a 29% target share. So during that same span that I just talked about, 29% target share is like absolutely legit high-end wide receiver 1 type of stuff.
Yeah,
now,
no question.
It's usually like the age 31 season and on where we tend to see a drop in production overall for fantasy wide receivers. But when you talk about elite wide receivers who have got it done in the past with like 4 or 5 wide receiver 1 seasons like he has, that production at the later stages of a career usually gets extended a little bit. So that age 31 drop-off can potentially be extended to 30, 32 or 33. At least that's what the data shows. So I'm not necessarily out on Diggs in 2024 because I think he'll come with a significant discount. And I think he could be someone who can help a dynasty contender next year as well.
Oh, yeah. Where do you imagine that he's going to go? In draft next year, go by round. Obviously,
I would go 3rd round. I think he's going to end up going in the 3rd.
That's where I think he would go too. And I have a feeling feeling he might float up into the second if people look at his price and are like, oh, Stefon Diggs,
Second might be a little high for me personally.
It might be a little high. Yeah, but I'm not saying I would take him there, but I think
Yeah.
we could probably see he'll probably start in the third round.
Right.
I wouldn't doubt people
And
look at
if
it.
he ends up going in the second, I'm going to end up passing. But in the third, I
Yeah.
think that's solid potential right
Value.
there.
Yeah. The price, the risk versus reward, 100%. We talked about that over the offseason. We did a whole post on it, risk it for the biscuit, like that kind of thing. But I think it's going to be hard to not look back at the utilization and be like, well, the utilization was there the whole time. It's just the production for some reason stopped. Now, maybe he did hit 30 years old and he's hitting that apex now, that ceiling where he's not going anywhere after this. But I just don't think that's the case. Like you said, the body of work that we've seen, these consistent wide receiver one seasons, this whole time he's been in Buffalo, the fact that he was the wide receiver one that we wanted him to be up until like week 9, halfway through the season, he was looking every bit like the wide receiver that we wanted him to be. I'm not going to be out on him either. I do think second round feels a little bit rich, if you talk about where he's going to go next season. But third round, like you mentioned, I'm with you on this one. He's probably going to be one of those bargain guys. I don't have any reason to say that he's not going to turn things around. But what would happen if he would come out next season, first 2 or 3 weeks, and have more of these games like this? Like it would be full on panic mode, especially if you took him in, even if you took him in the third round. Imagine you take him in the third round thinking you're getting a bargain, and now he comes out and has more of these types of games. Like, what would you do at that point? At that point, you're in way too far to even try to get off of him. Now it's like, hopefully we don't have to cross that bridge.
Well,
we'll cross
the
that bridge
offense,
when we get to it.
The offense also changed, later in the year. Once they got rid of Ken Dorsey, things have changed. So there's a few factors here, and also the Bills were winning, right? That's another factor. Like they didn't they just didn't have to throw the ball as much.
Don't fix it. Yeah.
So what was crazy, out of all the first round picks, there has been only 2 players that have come through. Okay. Christian McCaffrey and Tyreek Hill. That's it. Now, CeeDee Lamb and AJ Brown, like they were taken in the first round in some leagues, but if I'm looking at ADP, they were right outside the first round. Amon-Ra was also a second round pick, obviously worked out as well. But a few injuries made it bad, like Justin Jefferson, and then Joe Burrow for Jamar Chase, Nick Chubb, right? Aaron Rodgers for Garrett Wilson, right? So this year was a serious crapshoot, man. Like you just had to get lucky if you hit.
Yeah. You had to get lucky. And I'm going to pull up the draft results on our league right here. Hang on. I just want to see these guys that were at the top. This is super flex. That's gonna skew it a little bit. But let's see. Christian McCaffrey came through, yes. Tyreek Hill came through, yes. Cooper Kupp, no, not at all. He was injured, didn't do a whole lot. Devontae Adams. Was Devontae Adams a first rounder? I think he was.
No, he was a second round pick. His ADP was in the second round.
Okay, yeah. It's terrible because I'm looking at Superflex League and just seeing who was taken where, that kind of thing is blowing it up a little bit. But Garrett Wilson, man, he was definitely a first round pick. He was late first round, correct?
No, he was also second.
Oh my God, what the heck?
Yeah, yeah, he was also second.
Was Austin Ekeler first round? Yeah. Do you have the ADP?
Was,
I only have our draft board right here.
Yep, I have the ADP. Austin Ekeler was he was going off as the 4th overall player. Kelce.
That's crazy.
Goes off the board as a 5th overall pair. Tyreek Hill worked out. Saquon didn't work out. Bijan, as a first rounder, probably you would say didn't work out. Stefon Diggs didn't work out. Nick Chubb didn't work out. Devontae Adams did not work out. CeeDee Lamb, ding, ding, ding. Cooper Kupp, nope. Patrick Mahomes, nope. AJ Brown, I would say so.
Nope.
Tony Pollard, nope. Derrick Henry, nope. Josh Jacobs, nope. Garrett Wilson, nope. Amon-Ra, ding, ding, ding.
Yeah.
Josh Allen, you could argue that worked out. Jalen Hurts, you can argue that worked out. Jalen Waddle, nope. Yeah. Chris Olave, end of the second round, early third round. What do you think? Yay or nay?
I'm going nay.
Okay.
We did so much discussion on him. Things were trending. He had the yards per route run last season. He was looking good. We had Derek Carr coming in, who was supposedly the deep ball god, and he peppered Devontae Adams, and he just hadn't done that with Chris Olave like he did last season. So it's like, I'm putting the veto on that one and saying no.
Chris Olave is going to have a better 2024, isn't he?
I hope. I hope. I wish we could say yes and just be like, yep, stamp it. This guy's gonna have a better, 2024. But I just don't know. It's really confusing because this offense, when you have Alvin Kamara and Taysom Hill and all that stuff, it's like,
I know.
Are we not?
I know.
You know
it's gonna happen. I don't know.
Okay.
No one knows anything. We could be seeing the end of Austin Eckler's fantasy dominance at this point. 29 years old in May. Had a few top 5 finishes after coming back from his injury this year, but then outside the top 20 in 6 of his last 7 games this year. Pretty brutal down the stretch in the fantasy playoffs. He's past the age apex at this point. We don't see many 29-year-old running backs having RB1 seasons. He's not even sure how things are going to go based on his comments on his podcast. Like, he even mentioned practice squad. Like,
Ew.
you're like, whoa, Austin. Like, let's relax. Like, what are we talking about here? You're Austin Ekeler,
Yeah.
I'm
Mr.
not
Fantasy
sure
Football.
he's so confident in how things will go next year, right? He's killed it for us. He's won leagues for us. I hate talking about the downfall of players. Like, it's just like not something that I like talking about, but it's just a reality of a part of our analysis that goes into it. Age is a factor. We even talked about it before this season that Ekeler was past his age apex. But let's see what his situation is like in 2024, which team he's going to be on. Let's see what his ADP looks like. But usually we don't see running backs that could be high end fantasy producers at this point of their careers.
Yeah. What happens if Austin Ekeler lands in Miami?
I can see it.
Yeah.
I don't think
Could you
actually
imagine?
I don't see it. I don't. You know why? Because I
Why?
just think Mike McDaniel wants explosive players. Straight up.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I guess it's true. Yeah, he's not explosive at this point.
He's not.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's just tough. Look at Austin Ekeler, where last year he was doing what he needed to do. He was having these games where he had all these scrimmage yards, 100 scrimmage yards. He wasn't doing that a whole lot this season. The efficiency on the ground game, non-existent, not scoring touchdowns. And that was just pretty much systemic of the whole Chargers offense. They weren't good on offense this season, especially on the ground. But you look just in overall, the games where he came through, 8 targets, 7 targets, 7 targets. And then down the line, 7 targets again. Unless he's getting those targets, and he didn't have those targets every single game. There are a bunch of games where he had 2 targets, 3 targets. That's it. Like, he seems a little bit too dependent on that now at this point. The upside is gone on a per touch basis. Now it's a volume. He's a volume based play. It's tough to diagnose what exactly went wrong besides the age thing. You don't want to just chalk it up to that, but I just remember the people making the Mike Tolbert comments on that one run that he had down the sideline. He didn't look like he was moving at all. It looked like someone slowed down the video. Like, that was one of those points where it's just like, okay, now suddenly, these statistics, they're not looking so good. Now the eye test is starting to show it a little bit. It's like, what are we going to do? Like,
Yeah.
I'm personally probably going to avoid Austin Ekeler unless he lands in some slam dunk situation. But I don't know if I'd want a piece of Austin Ekeler next season just because there's so much, like, it looks pretty darn close. It looks like an age fall off, smells like an age fall off, probably is an age fall off, but given what he's done for us in fantasy, over the years, like, do we give him a mulligan? I think maybe he deserves it. I'm not going to be the one to give him that, though, personally.
I think you nailed it. Guys, that's going to do it for this episode. We appreciate you. Thank you so much for rocking with us this fantasy season. We're hoping that you're a champion. We hope that we helped and didn't hurt you too much by the dumb things that we said, a lot of the dumb things that I said this year. Hopefully we said more good things than bad. We'll be back later this week, though. We're going to be talking about week 18. Not necessarily, whole lot of, who to start, that sort of thing, but talk about, all the playoff scenarios. There's so many playoff scenarios to talk about going into week 18, and a bunch of other good stuff. And we'll get there. Also, we'll be talking, we'll be talking about a couple of fantasy awards that we'll be giving out to these players. We'll be talking about that on Thursday as well. All right. So we'll see you guys then. Take it easy. Bye-bye.